Another year, another potential national championship run for the Penn State Nittany Lions. This roster is absolutely loaded. James Franklin even came out and said that this is probably the best roster he's ever had. And a lot of analysts agree with him. You're bringing back quarterback Drew Aller. A lot of people, look at him as one of the better quarterbacks that will be draft eligible this year. When is Penn State going to get over the hump? The answer is we really don't know, because we don't know about James Franklin, the head coach of Penn State. We've continued to have questions because he continued to come out short in the biggest of games where you felt like the Nittany Lions should have won. Let's not get started with the record against Ohio State. I think James Franklin has won one game against Ohio State since he's become the coach, and he's been the coach for a good amount of time now. So we're talking about one win in a handful of years, maybe going on a decade. So it's like, when are you going to get over that hump? So it's like we talk about them getting to the national championship, but you haven't been able to beat Ohio State, a team that has owned you in your own conference. Well, thanks to the new format of the college football playoff, Penn State no longer has to beat Ohio State to get to the playoff. For years, they were the ones that were standing in their way, time and time again. And it's the reason why Penn State just comes up this close to not making the playoff. They finish 5, 6, whatever bowl game comes right before the playoff. This is who they've been. Some numbers that are interesting, though. Touchdown receptions by Penn State's transfer receivers last season. They had 11 more than the 6 Nittany Lion receivers had caught last year. So we're talking about Devontae Ross, who had 11 touchdowns at Troy, transferred in from there. Trevor Pena, 9 touchdowns from Syracuse. And Kyron Hudson, who had 3 at USC. These guys are figured to bring a big, strong boost to that receiver room, which I think absolutely was a no-show most of the year last year. The Nittany Lions did not throw to their wide receivers that often, and they were just not effective. They had a great tight end in Tyler Warren, who's now been drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. So that was Drew Aller's favorite target. And yeah, Tyler Warren was an absolute weapon. So you find a way to get him the ball as often as possible. But I think what eventually started to do Penn State in was you became predictable. Yeah, you have Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton back there to give the football to, two very good running backs. But eventually you have to have a pass game. You have to be a balanced team and keep teams and keep defenses on their heels. If they know you're running the ball, eventually they're going to adjust. If they know you're going to Tyler Warren, they're eventually going to adjust because they know those are the guys. There wasn't a defense that the Nittany Lions faced last season who were actually worried about their wide receivers. Penn State got by on Tyler alone and a really great defense. But by and large, the receivers for Penn State were a no-show. You figure that these guys that I just mentioned will come in and definitely fix that. But by and large, I don't think there's an excuse for Penn State, A, not to get back to the playoff, and B, not to get to the national championship game. I think on paper, this is one of, if not the best roster in college football, maybe outside of Texas. Drew Aller did not play well in that playoff game against Notre Dame. James Franklin got out-coached by Notre Dame. And it's a returning theme that we keep seeing with Penn State. Yeah, we have great seasons. You beat everybody, but you lose to Ohio State. Normally, like I said, that ends your playoff drive because losing that late in the season basically destroys your playoff chances. Well, now we have the new format. You still can't beat Ohio State, but you can get into the playoff. I personally wonder if Penn State will think about moving on from James Franklin if they don't get it done this year. Because what more do you need? You look at the schedule. I mean, the first test really for Penn State is September 27th against Oregon. That's really their first big test. How are you going to perform against Ohio State? How are you going to perform in the next big game, James Franklin? Are you going to make adjustments? Are you going to get Penn State over the hump? Because quite frankly, I don't really see a team outside of Texas that can take down Penn State. I don't know what Ohio State has a quarterback. I don't know what Ohio State's really going to look like because they lost a handful of starters to the NFL. Very talented, very, very talented team they had last year. We're not sure what Ohio State looks like. There's a lot of people that are murmuring saying that Ohio State was maybe a little overrated at number 3, right behind Penn State. So other than Oregon, I don't think Penn State should lose a game until they get to the playoff. If you lose to Ohio State again, those questions and those, those conversations about James Franklin, those murmurs, they're going to start getting louder and louder and louder. They're already loud because, again, I just mentioned the record. You beat Ohio State one time in your tenure since you became the head coach. I think it's like 1-12 or something like that. You're eventually going to have to beat Ohio State to get to a national championship. An appearance at this point would be great for James Franklin because I feel like anything less than that is a failure of a season. And I think if it comes to that where Penn State underachieves once again, do you start looking at James Franklin and asking the question, do we need to move in a different direction? I think the question is fair.